So we have this great encounter, another great encounter from John's gospel. Remember, for the scrutinies, last week was the woman at the well, John chapter 4, and now John chapter 9, this moment of the man born blind. And it takes place, they mention, in the pool of Siloam. And it's interesting, they discovered what is believed to now be the actual first century pool that Jesus, that this man would have been told to go wash in, right on the outskirts of the the original city of David, as it's called, the south part of Jerusalem. They've done excavations. So not only going back to the city of David, remember David's the one who founded the capital at that city that was called Salem. And it then would, so this pool was on the outskirts of that. So they found it in 2004. They dug it up. So last time we went to Jerusalem, we had a chance to visit. It was my first time going to visit there. But that was at the end. It was kind of a reward for a rather taxing experience we had. And again, this was something that I hadn't done before, so I really didn't know what we were getting into. And I usually don't like to do that when I'm guiding pilgrimages. I kind of like to know what we're to expect and to kind of forewarn people if there's some challenging moments. But I wanted to visit the excavations of the city of David, and part of the experience or the exhibit and museum is that you actually go through what they now call Hezekiah's tunnel. So this was a tunnel created in the 8th or 9th century BC by the king Hezekiah in the midst of the conflict with the Assyrians. And remember, if you might remember that in that conflict, the south part of Israel was able to fight them off, so to speak, and maintain their identity. That's the northern part of Israel fell and essentially, never recovered, so to speak. The south, remember, about 150, 200 years later, would then fall to the Babylonians, the exile that we might be familiar with, and then, that was really the low point of the people of Israel. But this tunnel was created so that they could bring water from a spring that was outside of the old city of David into the new, or into the city. And it allowed them, obviously, to fight off the siege and to survive. And so this is the pool that this man is invited to go wash in. But this tunnel that you go through, it's underground for, hundreds of, it felt like hundreds of yards. It may have been maybe 100 yards or so, but, and more recently, I've been getting more claustrophobic. I don't know if anybody else has that experience. So we're going underground. We're kind of in this place where, there's no way out except the other end. And we're in a pretty confined little tunnel we're going through. So I have to admit, I had to take some deep breaths and didn't want to say anything to anybody else. Okay, I'm struggling, because I wanted to be this a source of strength maybe for others who were struggling. So nobody was really saying anything. And then we get to the other end. We go to the pool of Siloam, we had a prayer there and prayed for, our own kind of renewal of our spiritual sight and that removal of blindness that in our lives, the things we can be blind to. And then later that night, we would typically at dinner or whatever, maybe having a glass of wine at the end of the day, we were processing. And finally one person kind of said, was anybody else kind of freaking out in the Hezekiah tunnel? And then when you know it, everybody, right? Oh yeah, me too. Oh my gosh, that was crazy. And then, basically, Father, what were you thinking, right? And I had to admit, I too was a little, taken aback. And we all were kind of saying, I wonder if we knew when we started what we were getting into, if we would have done it still. Because there was a sense, we all were glad we did it. There was a sense of accomplishment. There was a sense of, that was a neat thing to experience that history and to see this tunnel through which the people of Israel, 2,800 years ago, were able to survive. And we all said, yeah, I hope I would, but I would probably second guess it. And they all said, I don't think I would have thought I could do it. You know, and I think sometimes that can be part of our blindness. Yes, a big thing that we're called to in this invitation for Abby and all of us with her, to look at those areas of sin, the things that we're being blind to, that we're overlooking, the people that we are treating as if we don't see them, that are invisible to us, that we should be reaching out to, obviously, particularly those in need, those who are suffering around us. So there is this sense of seeing things around us and how God is working. There's certainly also a sense of the wisdom that we know that we want to grow in, that seeing things as God does and not as human beings. Remember, that's why Peter was chosen to be the rock, the first pope, because multiple times he was able to show that the Holy Spirit was working through him. He had the gift of wisdom to see things as God does and not as human beings. So those are all part of the invitation of this week of Man Born Blind for all of us. But I think one of the ways we can be blind too is blind to what we are capable of with God's grace. And me being a planner and wanting to know always what's to be expected and wanting to make sure everybody else knows so they're not taken, by surprise by something, sometimes I think that's a level of control. There's a sense that I want to know what I'm getting into before I say yes. And I think sometimes God just says, don't let that fear blind you. Just be faithful today. I'll take care of tomorrow. We know Jesus said that, Today is enough to worry about. Why are you adding tomorrow's worries onto it? But we do that in our human brokenness and in our blindness that can come from fear. Similar to that tunnel. If we were to know when the beginning of the pandemic and had an ability to say, do you think you could survive this for a year? I'm guessing we would all say we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. But yet here we are. We've done it with God's grace. Now, yes, a lot of challenges, a lot of setbacks, a lot of, literal and spiritual ailments and deaths. But we're here. And God, that call to continue to persevere, to trust in Him, and not allow the potential fears of the future to stop us from just saying yes to God today. And so hopefully we can come back and we can say that somehow we look at this past year and we believe God is working through it. He wants to form us. He wants to strengthen us. He wants to help us have better vision from the way He sees things versus how the world sees things. And we just hopefully continue to say, Lord, help me to have the eyes to see. Help me to know Jesus Christ is the only lens that really helps me understand my life, this world, and what God calls me to. It's only in the vision that He provides, not my own and not this world's. So let's allow the man born blind to remind us of that. Abby, as she gets ready for baptism, which is that enlightenment that we have been gifted with in our new birth in Jesus Christ. But we obviously come to renew that every day, every Mass, every Lent. We say, Lord, again, help me to see even more your vision, your life, your love. And in so doing, to also not allow those fears to stop us from accomplishing the great things and the challenging things and the downright seemingly impossible things, not in our strength, but in that grace and strength that only God can provide.